So I'll now call the meeting to order. And Mike, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance?
Let's begin.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Acting City Clerk, would you please call the roll?
Mayor Kalnick,
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Verapapa,
Here.
Councilmember Masalavet,
Here.
Councilmember Moore,
Here.
Councilmember Sistarsik,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. Okay, it's time for oral communications. At this time, members of the public may address the council regarding any items within the subject matter jurisdiction of the City Council. Pursuant to the Brown Act, the council cannot discuss or take action on any items not on the agenda unless authorized by law. Matters not on the agenda may, at the council's discretion, be referred to the city manager and placed on a future agenda. Those members of the public wishing to speak are asked to come forward to the microphone and state their name for the record. All speakers will be limited to a period of 5 minutes. Speakers must address their comments only to the mayor and the entire council, and not to any individual member of the staff or audience. Any documents for review should be presented to the city clerk for distribution. Do we have any supplemental communications?
No email comments were received. One PowerPoint was received after the posting of the agenda that was distributed to City Council and made available to the public.
Okay, thank you very much. So anyone wishing to speak may come to the podium.
Good evening. Mayor and council members, my name is Michelle Newman. I'm a 20-year resident of College Park East. Thank you for convening this important meeting to determine how the city allocates funds for the coming year. I understand there are many needs and each department has a wish list for you to consider. This past February, I forwarded this council and staff a letter expressing mine and over 100 College Park East residents our concern regarding the dire conditions of our local parks and open space. And I have copies of that email here if you need one. Our letter was and still is a call to action for this council to approve and expedite long overdue investments to improve the condition of CPE's 4 parks. We understand the budget includes significant dollars to maintain and repair our infrastructure, including our streets, sewers, and tidelands. But let's not be short-sighted. Our parks and open space are equally important to our infrastructure. They deserve as much consideration as your staff has dedicated to paving, drainage, and technology. Parks aren't even an afterthought in this budget. College Park East parks are crumbling. They are outdated, unsafe, and no longer being used for their intended purposes. Now is the time to fund their desperately needed improvements. There is absolutely nothing proposed in the 2022-2023 budget that begins to scratch the surface to improve the woeful conditions of our community's parks. As you deliberate how to spend our taxpayer dollars, I'd like you to consider summer is quickly approaching and our kids need a safe park for recreation. Nearly 10 years ago, Seal Beach prepared a Parks and Community Services master plan. Consultants were retained and paid over $100,000 for a comprehensive plan that concluded most of the city's park playground equipment areas are in need of replacement and upgrades. And what has been done since then? Very little. We should not have to live with an unsightly porta potty or crumbling, dangerous play equipment any longer. Our children deserve better. Sticking our head in the sand, sitting idly by while our parks continue to deteriorate, denying our children a safe environment for play is no longer an option. If a budget is a statement of values, this city seems to have a deaf ear to what we, the residents of College Park East, value: safe, clean, and modern parks. In a matter of days, this body will meet again to dive deeper into the next year's budget. Between now and then, we implore you to sharpen your pencils to budget meaningful investments across College Park East parks and open space. There is no excuse not to. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else?
Dan Brandt. I'm a College Park East resident, been there for about 6 years. I worked Parks and Recs for about 12 years. Just going to speak a little bit. Part of the reason we came to Seal Beach and College Park East was because we got a great PD, we have great schools, great infrastructure. I had really young kids at the time. Once the kids grew up a little bit, started going to the parks, and then we learned how bad the parks are there in College Park East, especially Heather Park, the one that's the most used and in the worst condition. And I'm familiar with the fact that they've appropriated $250,000 for the grant funds to replace the play structure, which I don't think is going to be even close to enough, because you guys are going to be replacing a play structure that's not built for kids that are over 6 years old. You know, the 7, 8, 9, 10-year-olds just climb on top of it. So I don't think that's going to do it. It's kind of piecemealing the infrastructure changes rather than coming up with a master plan and trying to figure out how to actually solve the problem for each park one at a time. The porta potty that's out there, I mean, that thing's been there for I don't know how many years. So I think maybe doing, if you look at other parks in other cities, I mean, I'd implore you to go on a tour of Los Alamitos or Long Beach or Fountain Valley or any of them. None of their parks look like ours, none of them. So I'd implore you to go out there and take a look. So maybe we can have some money and we can think of it as an investment, not only for our kids, but for property values. A nice neighborhood has nice parks. Like we have a great police department, we have great other things. But if we're not investing in the parks, then that is not going to increase our property values. And that'll give you a return right there. I know that we have some money that's allocated for College Park East, $477,000 that's not being spent, that's been sitting in an account. I implore that we spend that money on top of the $250,000 to spend it all on one park and actually improve a park, rather than, I think we put like a shade structure in one park, and I actually looked at it today, and they put the end of the shade structure right on the out of bounds line for the basketball court. So, we're piecemealing it, and that's just opened up civil liability. Someone's playing basketball and they run right into it. So when we're piecemealing these things, we're not actually coming up with a master plan saying this park should have shade structure, new benches, a playground equipment that's appropriate for different ages and the amount of volume that people are bringing in. So I think we need to think about a real investment and not just $250,000. And to be honest, like I said, it's kind of embarrassing. I had my dad come visit, and he's like, "Oh man, this neighborhood's amazing. Everybody keeps their houses up. He can see how great the neighborhood is." And he took my kids to the park, and he's like, "Wow, that's embarrassing. That's horrible." So he's like, "I think your city could do better than that." And then, to be honest, everybody I know is bringing their kids to Rush Park, or they're taking them to Rossmore. They're taking them to Cottonwood Park because that's where kids want to play. There's nothing fun about our parks. We have asphalt basketball courts. That's that's like 1980s. We should have concrete basketball courts with some kind of surface painting. So those are kind of things that I think we need to think as a city, not just as College Park East, that we invest in that. So I appreciate your time. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Tim Ream, and I'm also a College Park East resident. I actually live across the street from Dan, and I don't think I'm really going to say anything beyond what's already been eloquently said, but I grew up here in Seal Beach in College Park East in the 1980s and grew up playing in Heather Park. And I'd just like to see my 4 and 7-year-old daughters also play there more often. Sometimes I've noticed they trip over some of the holes that are there in Heather Park on the ground there, and it's just kind of concerning. My 4-year-old has a birthday coming up, and we actually just elected to have her birthday at Little Cottonwood Park because she actually prefers to play there. And it's no knock against Seal Beach. I mean, we moved back here after living in Los Angeles for a reason, because Seal Beach is a wonderful place, and we love it, and we love everything about it. But I do believe Heather Park could use some serious improvements, and just wanted to come here today to say that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening. Thanks for taking the time to hear us. My name is Rod Mokhtari. My wife and I gave up our medical practices to move out here in mid-August. And the reason for that is we fell in love with this community, and we saw this as a community that really is built on putting each other first and putting our children first. And it's really lived up to that. We've gotten to know our neighbors. We love the schools. Everything about our decision has just gone amazing, and we couldn't be happier to be here. When we do look at the parks, though, it doesn't fit with the rest of this community. It doesn't fit with what this community really is. I'd encourage each of you, if you haven't been to Heather Park, to please go and take a look and ask yourselves if it's a place that makes you proud to be a part of Seal Beach. It doesn't match with anything else that we are in this community. So everything that everyone else has said, I would just echo. And I have 3 young kids. I live just down the street from Heather Park. We still take them there. We love being there, but when we look at it, we definitely think a lot can be done. And we appreciate you all hearing us today. Thank you.
Thank you. Anyone else wish to speak? Okay, then we'll close public comment. And now it's time for the workshop itself. Our proposed fiscal year 22-23 operating budget. And I'll now call upon our city manager to get us started on this.
Thank you, Mayor, and good evening, council, executive team, all of our support staff and the community. I will say, it seems kind of unbelievable. It's been 3 years since we've been all together in the same room. And happy to see we have members of the public here. We didn't have, unfortunately, that opportunity over the last 2 years. So I know I speak on behalf of all of us in saying we're looking forward to the discussion with you tonight and in future days. Before I turn the presentation over tonight to our interim finance director, Sherry Johnson, I just wanted to highlight a few significant points that I want us to keep in mind as we're going through the discussion. Of course, we're extremely pleased and really fortunate to be in a position to be presenting you again over the last several years with a balanced budget. And I don't in any way say that lightly. And I don't think any of us here do. I know the council doesn't either, because even through a 2-year pandemic, we're still able to work through significant financial challenges on an ongoing basis to provide you and the community with a balanced budget. And we wouldn't get here without a significant heavy lift from our staff team. And in years past, I know me personally, I haven't necessarily highlighted this in our budget workshops, but I think it's important, and I don't want the opportunity to pass tonight, because even before we have an opportunity in individual council briefings with all 5 of you, we've basically been through 4 to 5 to 6 months of the development budget process to be in a position to be able to present you a draft budget in a council briefing. And that doesn't necessarily show you the work of the staff team and how far we've come over a significant number of months to get to a point where we've presented you with a balanced budget. And I think that's important, especially when we start talking, line level detail in our budget about, questions from council about, are there opportunities for savings in other areas, without you recognizing the fact that we've been through significant discussions at our staff level to make a significant number of cuts already. As we discussed with you in those council briefings over the past few weeks, we messaged to you that early in the development budget process, and this is at the staff level when we take our initial comments from our department heads and presenting their budgets. And I want to highlight that it's a zero-based budget. So it's not necessarily staff even coming in with their wish list. These are baseline, what it's costing us to provide programs and services to the community. And at that point in time, when we first looked at our initial draft budget, we were at a $4.7 million budget deficit. And a big reason for that, and Sherry's going to go into a little bit of that tonight, is the fact that revenues are increasing at a much higher pace than, or they're not increasing at a high enough pace to keep up with the increasing costs of expenditures, that we need to continue to provide the same level of services and programs to our community. And I think that's important for all of us to keep in mind tonight. And while our executive team, along with their support staff members, work closely with the finance team, and I'll share with you, I countless hours of us working together to find a way to make significant expenditure reductions to close a gap between $4.7 million deficit and a balanced budget without impacting programs and services to our community. And as you will see tonight, and we're going to start talking and having that conversation, we already started that in our council briefings, is those expenditure reductions year after year just aren't sustainable long-term. And we really need to start talking right now, regardless of how controversial some of those might be, about opportunities that we might have here in the near future for new revenue sources and our ability to potentially capitalize on those. So with that, I want to thank, and they've heard me say this over and over again, but I can't say it enough, every member of our executive team and their support staff for the several months of dedication and their personal and collective ownership of the budget that we have that's before you tonight. I especially want to thank, acknowledge, and commend Sherry Johnson for her quiet strength and her respectful leadership over the past 6 months as our interim finance director, and the many, many years of financial expertise and experience that she brings to our team, and her generous willingness to continue to dedicate herself to her department, to our organization, to this council, and to our community. I'd also like to thank Elena Hong, our finance manager, for her many years of unwavering support and dedication to this organization and community, and again, the countless hours, especially the two of them, because as you know, not just me as the city manager, but every member of our executive team and support staff lean into them strongly as we work our way through this development process. So I want to thank both of you tremendously for the incredible support that you continue to guide us through this in our community, and to be in a position where we are tonight to be having this discussion. So I'm going to turn the presentation over to Sherry. As you know, this is a workshop. It's intended to be a study session, a back and forth dialogue. So I would encourage council. I know sometimes, especially when we were in a remote Zoom environment, it made more sense to allow the staff team to get through the presentation and then address questions from council. But I would encourage you, as we're moving through this presentation, if you've got questions at that point, please feel free, Mayor, on behalf of the council, to interrupt, and we'll pause and take questions at that point. And of course, at the end of the presentation, have plenty of opportunity for you to ask questions, as well as, of course, our executive team. They're experts in their budgets and what they've budgeted for on behalf of their respective departments, and they're prepared to answer individual questions as well. So with that, I'll turn the presentation over to our Finance Director, Sherry Johnson. Sherry?
Thank you, Jill. Good evening, Mayor and council members. Tonight, we will be discussing the proposed 22-23 operating budget with a focus on the general fund. On June 7th, we will be going over the 5-year forecast and proposed CIP plan. These workshops are intended to give you an opportunity to ask questions and advise the departments of any changes you wish to make to the proposed 22-23 budget prior to your approval at the June 27th council meeting. And as the city manager said, we did start with a $4.7 million deficit. We were hopeful that the pandemic was winding down and many deferred items could begin to be addressed. And unfortunately, as you will see, the proposed revenues could not support our costs. However, staff worked extremely hard to cut back and once again bring you a balanced operating budget. Just a recap of the current fiscal year 21-22. In fiscal year 21-22, the operating budget was presented without the use of reserves. The approach was to move towards a post-COVID-19 environment and focus on improvement and taking on some of the projects that were deferred in the 2 prior fiscal years, and included increased funding for building and park maintenance to address deferred items, payment of the city's utility accounts totaling $195,800, $750,000 in CIP recommendations using $520,000 in reserves. Currently, this is some good news, the general fund operations are projected to come in better than budgeted. And another good news, the city was awarded the GFOA Distinguished Budget Presentation Award for the first time. For the current proposed budget, the 22-23 budget approach was much like that of last fiscal year. While we are hopeful that an economic slowdown has been avoided and COVID-19 will continue to become less impactful, other issues and concerns have become apparent. Inflation is currently at over 8%. Fuel prices are reaching and expected to exceed $6 a gallon. Supply chain issues continue to drive prices up. COVID-19 cases are slowly rising. With all this in mind, departments were tasked to once again prioritize needs over wants and defer what they could to bring a balanced operating budget. General fund revenue is budgeted at an 8% increase, while overall expenses, including capital projects, are budgeted at a 10% increase. A 3% increase in base salaries for already negotiated contracts are included, while potential changes for those unions whose contracts expire on June 30th, 2022 are not estimated or included. Vacant positions are budgeted at step 2. Past practice had these at step 5. With facilities reopening, deferred maintenance will need to be addressed. CIP projects that were already planned will cost more due to the rising cost of construction. Other cost increases to note, a 14% increase in PERS costs, a 26% increase in insurance premiums. That's your general liability, workers' comp, and property. A 2.3% increase in OCFA contract costs, an increase in contract costs for contracts that were already negotiated in prior years, and there are no supplemental requests. So at this time, I'd like to present to you the proposed operating budget for fiscal year 22-23. So we'll begin with revenues. Overall revenue projections are expected to increase by 8%. As with all budget, revenues are budgeted conservatively to avoid overspending. The estimates are based on many factors, including information received from HDL, historical experience, and best estimate based on what is currently happening with the economy and the pandemic. With property taxes, we have seen unexpected increases during the pandemic. The housing market exceeded economists' predictions, and the 2021 median price of a home in the city has risen $1.4 million. This year's budget is an increase of 2%. While the last 2 years have shown higher percentage increases, the market is expected to slow down as interest rates and construction costs are rising. Sales use tax and the Measure BB transaction use tax are still increasing at a nice pace. As we continue to reopen the cities, retail and restaurants have been supported, as is reflected in HDL's estimates. With the transaction and use tax, this continues to grow with the support of online purchases, which have continued to grow in popularity, and laws have been passed to distribute the amounts more fairly. The transient occupancy tax has shown growth this year and reflects the largest percentage increase in revenues. This revenue source was hit the hardest during the height of the pandemic and is now showing signs of coming back as tourists are being welcomed back. Another revenue source worth pointing out are charges for services. These are also coming back with reopening, as well as the recent fee study that brought some undercharged services up to market. We are still in the process of completing the fee study, which was delayed during the start of the calendar year due to closures. Some of the fines and forfeitures were also impacted positively by the study. A couple of areas where we have probably been over-conservative are business license taxes, excise, and barrel taxes. We'll review these during the first part of the fiscal year and adjust if necessary at mid-year. This will be the case for all revenues. At mid-year, we will reassess and adjust if needed. This is just another view of how the various revenues make up the total collected. Taxes are by far the largest revenue source, followed by charges for services and fines and forfeitures, and so on. While taxes cannot be easily increased or not at all in some cases, there are opportunities to raise the other categories either through new services or by reassessing related costs and adjusting for cost recovery. Overall, appropriations in the general fund have increased by 10%. This is made up of an increase in operating expenditures at 5%, and capital projects have increased 482%. Capital projects have increased because of deferring projects during the last 2 years. We will specifically discuss capital projects at the budget workshop on June 7th. This is a breakout of total appropriations by department, and you can see the largest increases by percentage are non-departmental at 63% and marine safety at 39%. With the non-departmental expenses, these include capital projects, which we just showed at an increase of 482% on the previous slide. And for marine safety, this is a small department, so any increase here will be magnified. Overall, the departments maintained a status quo budget with only obligated contractual increases added. The only decrease in departments was the city attorney at 3%, or $15,500, and he, as well as the other departments, did a great job of cutting costs where possible. Again, this is just another view of how the expenditures are split up, and this one excludes the CIP. As expected, the largest costs are public safety, with police and fire services making up the largest portions. These are followed by city manager, which also includes risk management, and then public works, and so on. To summarize the budget, you can see that the general fund budget is presented as balanced with the $26,500 surplus for operations. Capital projects do require the use of fund balance at $2.6 million. And this is an estimate of what the fund balance will be at the end of June 30th, 2023. Fiscal year 2021 increased the fund balance by $2.3 million, while fiscal year 21-22 is expected to decrease it by $0.7 million, and fiscal year 22-23 by another $2.6 million. While somewhat delayed, COVID-19 has had and will most likely continue to have a negative impact on the fund balance. We were able to defer some of the impacts with federal and state funding. However, those funds have been spent or are accounted for. We are expecting another $2.85 million in ARPA funds later in the year, and council will be asked at that time how they would like those funds to be utilized. That anticipated revenue is not included in this budget. There were some staffing changes in the current budget, as noted on the next two slides. In community development, they eliminated a full-time building official, a full-time senior building inspector, and a full-time senior building technician, and the increased contract professional. Police department added 2 full-time senior community service officers, a part-time police aide, and they reclassed a lead CSO to police services manager. The finance department froze a full-time accounting technician, and the community services department froze a full-time recreation specialist. This slide shows the budget impact of the staffing changes. Community development changes were brought about because of hiring issues with the positions noted. While we have not been successful in finding qualified applicants, we have been successful with our use of consultants. The police changes are related to the newly approved in-house animal control department. The finance and community services froze 2 positions while analyzing their current staffing to see if we can continue to provide service and complete tasks without additional staffing. Some additional items to note: the cost allocation plan and fee study for community services, police, and marine safety are underway and expected to be completed by the end of the month. The new water and sewer rates were implemented July 1, 2021, and both funds are presented with balanced operating budgets. Just some takeaways from this budget. It is proposing the use of $2.6 million in fund balance from the general fund to address items that were deferred in prior fiscal years. There is no funding to the information technology replacement and vehicle replacement funds. Your Measure BB is now fully utilized as part of the operating budget, and we can anticipate ongoing small increases. However, the growth in this revenue source is not expected to grow at the rate of ongoing expenditures. So new revenue sources will be needed to sustain a balanced budget going forward. And a few revenue sources that should be considered during the fiscal year. An increase to the levy on the street lighting district to reduce the need for general fund subsidizing, metered parking for the downtown area, short-term rentals, consideration of a specific plan proposal which would allow for a hotel in the Old Ranch Country Club area, allow citing for not parking head-in, continue to review fees on a regular basis, and cannabis businesses. And while most revenue sources are not without controversy or easy to implement, they're far easier to deal with than cutting back services and programs that the residents and tourists enjoy. As we continue to reopen and a lot of the deferred items are brought to light, we will have to figure out a means to address them. Thank you for the opportunity to present the proposed budget. At this time, we do have staff available to answer any of your questions.
Council, you ready for questions? Tom?
Yes, thank you for the presentation. On the page 13 of the budget for the I just have a few questions. On the asset forfeiture, can we get an explanation on that item, what it is and why the 503,000 is on the right?
I'm gonna go back to that slide if I can find it. Is this the slide you're referring to? Oh. You're looking in the actual budget.
Let's see. Page 13 in the budget.
Oh, in the budget. Okay, thank you. So asset forfeiture funds, those are funds that the police department receives, and they're, I don't know if the chief would like to explain that program.
Thank you, Sherry, and thank you for the question, Councilman Moore. In short, our asset forfeiture funds, any funds that we receive as a result of seizures in regards to assets during our investigations, would then be thrown into, I guess, that budget bucket, for lack of a better term. And then if we need funds or equipment as a result of those assets seized, then we withdraw from those funds adequately and appropriately. If you're asking for the amount, right now there's some legislation that's making things a little bit difficult as it relates to asset forfeiture. So the minimal amount that's in there right now is very conservative, and we try to keep it that way because we don't depend on asset forfeiture for any of our expenditures because of those reasons. Therefore, we try to draw on some of our grants as well to offset some of the funding for our equipment as well. So.
Okay,
Hope that
I just was
answers
wondering what it was.
You bet, sir.
Thanks.
No problem.
On page 17, there's an engineering plan check. The amended budget's $150,000 and the estimated actual is $500. I was just wondering if you could explain why the discrepancy on that.
I'm sorry, I'm looking for it. So page 17,
The engineering plan check, I-405.
okay, the I-405. So those are all related to the I-405, and I'm not sure, do we have anyone here that can speak to the I-405?
Sure. Thank you for the question. Related to this, this line item right here, it's all related to the I-405 widening project. We previously recognized the revenue from the cooperative agreement. However, that has been reallocated to be pulled from a different, to pull directly from a deposit account for the money that we do receive from OCTA. So it's no longer recognized under the revenue in Special Projects 103.
Okay, so is that moved somewhere else then? Or,
That's correct.
where was it moved to? Or do you,
It is now under a deposits account, so we draw directly from it, and it's not part of the operating budget.
okay. And on page 19, what are PEG fees? It's at the top. Under Seal Beach Cable.
Those are related to cable, and I wish I could give you a good answer on that. I don't know why they call them
I
PEG
was just wondering what
fees.
it was. Yeah.
You want to answer, Lena?
Sorry, this one is actually related to the Seal Beach cable, and I believe the fee is based on a resolution of fee that's been passed. I think it has to do with the statute. So, so all the cable company like Spectrum, when they send in the money on a monthly basis, there's a franchise fee and there's also a PEG fee, and the PEG fee belong to Fund 50 for cable, for the Seal Beach TV cable.
Okay.
I mean, I can look it up, and later I'll give it to the city manager to in response to your question.
Okay. Yeah, I was just wondering what it was. On page 20, there's a sewer 503. Sewer fees. And in the, this is current budget, I guess, but the 2.87 million was the amended, and the estimated actual is 2 million. I was just wondering why it was off.
You're asking why the estimated actual is lower than the budgeted amount?
Yeah.
I believe we had a sewer increase at some point, and maybe the entire, and I could be speaking wrong, so can you speak to that, Iris? Is this a partial increase here?
I believe our sewer model actually shows a decrease in sewer fees and collections, so the estimated actual came in a little bit lower as a result of the sewer fee adjustments.
Okay. And I think that's it for now. If you can come back to me.
Okay, sure. Shelley?
Thank you. I have a few too. Let's see. On page 17,
Page 17.
page 17, the Republic, let's see which line it is. Waste Management Act, the act implementation fee went down for the proposed budget 22-23. Is this because we're losing some funds for, from Republic? Is that was my question, I think.
Good question, Councilmember. No, it's not because we're losing revenue. As you know, the AB 39 or Waste Management Act fee, we receive $10,000 a month, $120,000 a year.
That's what-
So we still continue to receive that money. We have utilized those funds for personnel related to trash and recycling. So as of right now, we don't have funds allocated for the new fiscal year because we spent that money on salaries related to staff that we charge. For example, I manage the contract, so 10% of my salary, unless I'm wrong, finance manager, is charged to solid waste and recycling. So we have a number of employees where we charge that fund to.
Okay, so we're still getting that money till we renegotiate, but it's just moved to somewhere else.
Well, maybe the finance manager can explain it a little bit better than I can, but I can tell you 100% that we continue to receive it, the $10,000 a month. It's just how it's allocated. Maybe finance manager can explain that.
The $10,000, the $10,000 we do continue to receive, but it has to do with the agreement that we signed for the outreach, that they deducted, instead of like the city paying them, they're gonna deduct it from the $10,000, so that's why we're only getting $90,000, is because we're paying to Republic Service for.
I apologize. I totally forgot. So many of these bills, we have AB 1826, AB 1594, and 1383, as you know. If you recall, the council last year approved a contract with the Republic to provide outreach for AB 1826 at $30,000. So there was a subtraction in that amount. We also use that money for consulting work done by HF&H as part of our renegotiations for 1383.
Okay. I had a question about the fire station number 48 bond payments. This is the one for this year, proposed $444.5 thousand. Is that, what is the date that should be running out pretty soon, and how soon?
I believe the last payment's going to be in January 2024.
Yeah.
January 2024, okay, so pretty soon. Okay, let's see, and business licenses went down, did we say that was from, what was?
So last year's business licenses were down, and this year, we're getting up and going with HDL. In fact, business licenses will actually be going out next week. We've been getting a few calls on that. But rather than just assume our businesses are going to be up and going, we wanted to kind of still remain conservative on that, because it has been one that's been lagging a bit. And there's a lot of people that just, businesses aren't coming back, and we're just not certain. So rather than be overly aggressive with that, we took a conservative approach.
Okay. Also on page 17, there was a transfer in operational under Tidelands Beach, and that was like almost $800,000 more than a couple, 3 years ago. Is that, what was that transfer in for?
I believe most of this large transfer is, this year we added some police hours to Tidelands. So we try and keep, with Tidelands, you want to keep your expenses that are related to Tidelands and Tidelands, and there are some police working out there. So we put some of the police hours into that budget, and it's just a better representation of Tidelands and the cost of Tidelands to show it that way. But that operation, or that transfer in, comes from the general fund.
Okay. On page 18, under park improvement 208, Quimbiac fees, $10,000 back in 2021. Is that from the DWP project, or what? Where did those Quimby fees come from? Does anybody know?
Alexa?
I'm afraid I don't have an exact answer to that,
Okay.
but that would make a lot of
It'd make
sense,
more
and that would
sense.
be
I'm
my
trying to think
assumption.
that's a few
But I'll
years
double
ago,
check.
But
Yeah.
when the Quimby would come in at near the beginning sometime, or? Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Let's see, page 21. Let's see, it says sale of surplus property. Let's see what that is. Oh, at the top, internal service funds, vehicle replacement, sales of surplus property. Is that just sales of extra vehicles, or $60,000?
I do know with your new vehicle, your lease with Enterprise, that you do get money back when you turn in a vehicle. They'll give you some gains on it. So I'm not completely sure if that's what this $60,000 is. I do also know that the Public Works Director did have some items that he was going to try and sell. So it could be that as well.
Okay.
If I may add to that, Director Johnson's assessment about the sales of the vehicles that are turned in as a result of the enterprise lease is correct.
Okay, let's see, back on page 15. There's two different accounts for recreation lap swim passes. One is like the second one down, it's just a small amount, and then there's another one down there, halfway down, recreational lap swim passes. Is there a reason that there's two different funds for, or do we call them funds? Account numbers,
Yes, departments.
departments.
And I'm not sure on this one. I could find out for you what the names of the two departments are. Do you have anything that tells us what the names
If I may,
Please.
we have adult lap swim, and then we have recreation lap swim, which is be families and kids, so it's two separate passes.
Separate okay, okay, thank you. Let's see, on page 15 also, there was animal citations, $27,000 expected. Would that be what we're expecting for added income?
So
because of-
that is part of the new in-house animal control. They are expecting to be able to increase their citations because it will be in-house.
And do we have a category for animal licenses? I didn't really
We
notice
do
it,
have a
but
category for animal licenses, and it should be about
52,000 or
something like that.
that.
Oh, yes, on page 14,
14, okay.
second grouping of numbers, 52,100.
Oh, I see it, okay. Also on page 15, it says it's revenue, but it's traffic report electronic. I was just wondering what that was. Page 15. It's about a third of the way down.
That's department, what department is that? That's a police department program, sorry.
Sorry, we're on a laptop, so we're trying to follow along with your numbers. Page 15, and then what was the section? I'm
But
sorry.
It's about a third of the way down. It says traffic report dash electronic.
Oh, yeah.
And it kind of jumped up, so I was wondering what,
Captain Ezra will come up and explain that since he was vital in all of our traffic reporting processes.
If you're involved in a collision, you're able just to go purchase the report online versus coming into the station. So they're able to do that electronic fee, and that's where the money goes into.
oh, okay.
Good job, Captain.
And then there's two different lines for rental of property on page, let's see, they're both on page 16. One is in the top general fund, use of money in property, and the other one, let's see. Oh, the other one's on page 7, top of page 17, leased facilities, rental of property.
The one on page 16, the rental property telecom is actually for cell sites. And on page 17 is actually, rental property is for like all the lease that the city, like for the annex and the beach restaurant.
Beach House.
Yes, the beach house restaurant.
Okay. Okay, and page 16 also has the sewer overhead, water overhead. I also noticed that it looked like the sewer overhead increased, or the estimate proposed, and I thought that the sewers were going down, so I was trying to figure out, is that sewer fee, or is that difference between sewer and sewer capital fund, or what?
As the overall sewer rates did decrease, that's why the recognized revenues did go down for what we estimate for the closeout of this fiscal year.
Okay, to me, it looked like they went up like 293,000 or something. Let's see, to page 16.
The sewer overhead.
Sewer
Yeah.
overhead?
And this,
20,
Yeah, see, it
Yeah,
looked,
2020, 21 was 54,000, and now
and now it's,
293.
So these are the cost of the general fund, so these are transferred into the general fund from the sewer. So
so it's a
So it's
pass-through?
it's a pass-through from
Pass-through,
sewer to general fund, and that would be for your employees that are working, from the general fund, all the the city manager's time, there's a group of people that work in the sewer but are paid out of the general fund. So this is, and just the use of the facilities and stuff, so this is what your overhead costs are. So this is actually a revenue to the general fund.
Okay. And then also on page 16 was vehicle release. Okay, this is near the bottom of other revenues. It says vehicle release, and it jumped from $43,000 up to $120,000. I was wondering if anybody knew what vehicle release was?
This is our tow fees, basically, and every time we release a vehicle for, let it be a multitude of violations in regards to parking, we collect a fee for that service. And the jump is the increase of all of our senior CSO staffing over the last couple of years, particularly as it relates to our department reorganization plan. So you're finally starting to see a little bit of revenue jump in that category.
Okay. And then, so we had two, I guess I was looking at looking at some, let's see. Some personnel summaries in the beginning, and then at the back, I was having a little trouble with some position allocation plans back there. I know that when we were looking at voting on Measure BB back in 2018, we knew that the increase that we were going to get in the first year or so was going to kind of taper off by 23, 24, something like that. And we did increase our police officers like we said we were going to, but looking at the position allocation plan and comparing that back to 16, 17, 18, 19, it looks like we have increased about 20 full-time equivalents in the last, 6 years. So that's kind of, I imagine that puts a strain on the budget compared to,
I mean, where is this now? You're showing that we've hired 20 more officers?
not officers, they're just across, there's, I think, I'm not sure where they all come from, one recreation, one in here, one in there, but this, back in 16, 17, it was like 133, 132 in 18, 19, and now we're at, in this one, proposed 152. And I thought maybe it was just because we'd filled up the vacancies, but there were 12 vacancies back then, and we have 18 vacancies in this budget. We have still in community community development, we have contract people right now, so we have not people in there. So I was just saying, well, wait, it seems like we've grown a bit, and then we're trying to figure out, why we're tight. I don't know.
And some of those could be your part-timers, because this includes part-time as well, that they're just converted to
equivalents,
full-time
yeah.
equivalents. And I think that's probably where your growth has come in, as people can't afford to, try and use part-time because they're less expensive to the city. They're not paying purse costs and additional costs on them. So without knowing for sure, and we could delve into this further for you, but my best guess would be it's your part-times that have gone up, because anytime you increase a full-time position, that has to come before council for approval.
Okay,
So,
okay. And did we ever hire a
concierge person, and what department was that going to be in?
We are in the process. We did make an offer letter to the person, so hopefully he will come on board by the end of the month.
Okay, okay, thank you. That's all my questions for right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Go to Sandra.
I don't have any specific line item questions. I just have a couple. You're talking about community development and hiring, increasing the consulting fee and not hiring. Are we going to be freezing those positions? They'll be in the budget but no funding? Or are we eliminating them out of the budget altogether?
I thank you for the question. I believe they are in there, just not funded, so there's no money.
I can't understand you. I'm sorry.
That's okay, I apologize. I believe they are in there, just not funded. So we don't show a cost associated with an employee for those positions.
Okay, but the position is still there.
Correct.
So in the
We could
future, we can
reevaluate
fund
at a
it and
future
hire
time.
Our own. We don't have to go through the whole thing again. Okay. What are the rough savings in community development, or really any department, when we hire outside consultants instead of funding an in-house person? Do we have a rate maybe of how much we get out of that by hiring consultants to do the work? Just a rough, I'm not looking for.
Sure. Yeah, thank you for the question, and it certainly depends on the cost of the contract. When we look at consulting planning services, right now we still have an interim consultant planner. It's about a 75% difference. So I'm sorry, 25% difference. So if we hired someone in-house, we would save approximately 25%.
Okay.
When it comes to the building services, it's much closer. The difference is pretty
more
minimal.
even.
So it just depends on the cost of the contract.
Okay. I don't really have any other questions at this point. I'm sure something will come up, though.
If I could just add to that too, I think the value in general, not specifically to community development, that we have with
Any department.
hiring consultants is we may not have that specific expertise on our staff team.
Well, that goes without saying.
Yeah.
That's not what I was asking, though.
But I think sometimes in the community that's misleading because it's as if we're hiring consultants just to hire consultants, but in many cases, we don't have the expertise on our staff team. And I think the cost savings that you're seeing is more short-term.
Yeah.
You don't see the long-term cost savings by not hiring a full-time staff member and the ongoing costs of funding pensions. So,
Yeah. Okay, thanks. That's all.
Thank you. On page 20, can you address the water revenue increase and how that works and why the big increase, 1.5 million, if we're going to conserve water? And is that just the cost of water going up or the usage or a little bit of both?
Thank you for your question. The overall revenue increase for water is a result of the recent rate increase. So you do see it reflected in next year's budget since the new rates have been incorporated.
Okay. And then on page 17, kind of a minor issue, but under special projects with the benches and public works, I know there's a backlog in benches. It went down significantly. Do you just anticipate not ordering a lot of benches next year? Is that how that works, or?
Actually, we do.
Huh? Or we have them all ordered?
No, I think there's opportunities for 9 in the dog park if we approve
Well,
that.
that's why I'm wondering why it went down to $1,000, or maybe they're on order already. I don't. kinda
Actually,
curious.
I would like to take the opportunity to revisit this number. We may have a translation error at this, for this line item.
Okay, I mean, it's not a big number, I was just kind of curious how
Actually-
that works. And
Yes, actually, for the benches in here, for this special project, is actually based on like, if a residents want a memorial bench.
Right.
So we would put the funds in here, and then we would pay to get a memorial bench on, for the residents. So it's really based on like how many we're getting
anticipate.
requests from the residents. So, I mean, I'm assuming we're not getting much, so that's
Yeah.
why it's only budgeted 1,000. But it's mainly for memorial bench.
what's a bench cost?
I'll leave that.
Roughly, I mean, is it like,
It depends.
they're pretty
but-
expensive when I looked them up. Right, I mean,
They're usually about a few $1,000s, actually.
How many?
So it could be about $1,000,
so
$2,000.
that's, you're budgeting one bench for next,
Well, I think what she's saying is there potentially might be an error that we just need to go back and look at and see if we need to adjust the number.
all right.
And this
Thank
is
you.
revenue from outside source, so this would be somebody, a resident coming to you and wanting to purchase a bench. So you probably wouldn't want to be too aggressive on this number,
Yeah.
because you're not going to, you're only going to spend it if you get some money coming in. So this would have an offsetting cost in revenue, so
Yeah, okay. On page 15, for all those charges, services, I would imagine that the potential fee increases are all included in that? I mean, we haven't gone over all the new proposed fee
So,
schedules.
right, so this is the part that's coming, that should actually be finished, hopefully by the end of the month, these rec charges. So these are without any increases.
Without
These
increases,
are without
okay.
increases. So hopefully we can bring you some increases, potential increases
Okay,
by
yeah,
the end of the month.
potential, yeah. Okay, and then on your slide, number 10, can you just briefly describe what the increases are attributed to? Is it just more staffing?
Oh,
or-
you mean on the, yeah, what the different appropriations are? So,
Slide number 10. Well, there's some increases, 63%, you had it.
This one?
63%, 39%.
right,
Is
so a
that-
lot of these are, honestly, they're mainly personnel costs, and it's just your contracts and your PERS costs, your retirement costs. For the most part, everything was pretty status quo.
Is that just staffing then? Is that what you're
That's
saying?
a good chunk of any city's budget is staffing.
Well, I mean, the increase, though, that's attributed to staffing increases
Well, the
primarily?
63 in the non-departmental, that includes your 2.6 million in capital projects.
Uh-huh.
I believe in some of them, there was also, for part-timers, there was also the minimum wage increase, so that pumped up some of those personnel costs. And these don't include any potential contract increases. You have a few unions that are coming to the table now, and those aren't included in there. But the ones that have already been negotiated, those are in there. And I believe that was the 3% for those that have been
So staffing
staffing.
primarily, okay. And then
Yes.
on slide number 19, the revenue considerations,
Yes.
would you weigh some of those differently than others? Or, I mean, I know you can't put an
Yeah,
estimate.
no, it just, honestly, it just
I'm
depends on
more
what your,
curious than-
it's just what your city can stomach, and obviously the increase to levy the street lighting district, I think you're paying about close to 70,000. It's going upwards to 70,000 from the general fund to pay for those costs. The metered parking in downtown area, that's, again, that's what your city, I believe there's a pretty decent amount of money on that. And most cities that I know of, you do pay to park downtown. It's kind of a luxury that you have here that you don't. Short-term rentals, you do have short-term rentals in your city. You're just not collecting anything on them because you don't have an ordinance. But there definitely are people, renting out their homes. The consideration of a specific plan proposal, hotels would bring in a lot of money, but, you know, I don't know what the entire plan is. Maybe parts of that proposal aren't, you know, something you want to deal with or want to include, but definitely a hotel, a nice hotel in this area, I'm sure would bring a lot of, you know, TOT to your city. Citing for the not parking head-in, again, that's one that you used to cite, and I guess they've been warning for the last year, and people are still parking backwards. So, but again, that's lost revenue, and when you're down to a budget that's got a operating of $26,000 at the end of the day, you know, maybe that can help fund something. And continue to review the fees on a regular basis. That's a good idea. You're doing that now. You should make it part of a policy to review those if not every year, every couple of years, just to keep up with things. Because things get more expensive, your staff gets more expensive, and you're not going to cover costs completely 100%, but you should try and cover some, and it's reasonable. In the cannabis business, well, that's, you know, that's controversy all over the place. So I don't, you know, that's just whatever your city, but cities are going and allowing it, and it's bringing them funding. And there are very few places where you can get funding in your city with, you know, where you can make the decision. Any kind of a tax, you know, with your Measure BB, that has to go to the residents. And it's difficult. You know, it's the cost of putting on an election, it's all that stuff that's in there, and put all that cost into it, and it may not pass. But these are areas where you could probably go, with the exception of the first one, and, you know, just have a discussion, and maybe your residents are for it, maybe they're not. You know, that would be for you all to decide, but there's certainly something you should look at, because cost cutting is painful. I've been from a city that cut costs, and it's painful. And the residents, at the end of the day, the residents don't like it at all. And they will come back usually and say, hey, what can we do to keep our services and keep our city the way we want it to be?
But you don't have an estimated amount per, I mean, I know it'd be a rough guess, but like, you know, obviously some are more than others, right?
Absolutely.
But, I mean, would you know which ones are more potentially revenue
Well, I would
sources?
say that probably your metered parking in the downtown area is probably one of your lower ones. Your short-term rentals, depending on what kind of, you know, taxes you put on those.
Well, if we just increase the number that we had, you could calculate that if we have 14
Right.
currently.
And these are something, I mean, if you're interested in any of these, obviously your staff can bring them to you.
Yeah, I would just add to that we're, at the staff level, we're already evaluating these so to get more of a better estimate for you. I think the point here is we're there. We're at a time where we can't just keep talking about it. We
Right.
need, and regardless, I think from the council's perspective, as you're considering making policy decisions, that you're keeping these things in mind, that there's the potential that we're leaving money on the table and significant dollars on the table. And we don't want to just have this conversation every year when we're at budget workshops talking about it. These are things that your staff's bringing to you saying, these are potential opportunities. The short-term rentals is so limited because they sunset. There was a period when that ordinance was adopted where property owners applied and were considered for conditional use permits, and it sunset. So there's not an opportunity for property owners who you want to operate a short-term rental business to even get a conditional use permit. So even those that are operating illegally or collecting TOT, we can't accept it because we don't have a mechanism since there's not an approved conditional use permit. I know this is a consideration as part of the draft local coastal plan. The Coastal Commission is pushing cities for more visitor serving opportunities, and I think this council is going to be looking at that even further through that draft document. But I think the point here is we know there's opportunity. At the staff level, we're already evaluating it. I've seen some initial numbers already just on metered parking and re-looking at the head-in parking citations, and it's a significant number of dollars.
Right. Well, I
So
think
we're
that's-
asking you to keep all of this in mind. and potentially to get direction to bring some of these potential options forward, and you keep these in mind as you're making policy decisions.
Well, that's why I think it's important to kind of weight them, so to speak, depending on the big ticket items, if you will, and the smaller ticket items. So maybe eventually we can look into that.
We'd be happy to.
Yeah, thank you.
Mr. Mayor, what would be the timing in coming up with a proposal or an opportunity for the city council to consider those? What kind of timeline are we looking at? Because I think when we did VRBO and Airbnb back in the day when I was on the planning commission, that was a long time ago, it was a whole different environment. There wasn't Airbnb then. It was VRBO and whatever. But everything's changed. People have different expectations, and the quantity of those kinds of facilities that might be available to the public in our community particularly would probably be really attractive. As long as we can keep a handle on how many, somehow, I don't know how we do that, but how long would it take the staff to figure out when it could come back to the council for us to consider those issues?
That's a great question. I think some of these are easier than others, but my recommendation would be I'll go back with my team and have a more in-depth conversation about these opportunities, and then we come back maybe at a strategic planning meeting in the next few months. I know it hasn't been ideal because of our previous remote environment to really have an effective strategic planning meeting, especially virtually, but my recommendation would be those would be an opportunity for us to have those in-depth conversations with all of you once we've done a little bit more research, and then define what the council's priorities might be and direction to us so that we can start moving forward.
Yeah. The other issue is the meters downtown. I just wanted to say that I do remember that from when I didn't live here. And it was a long time ago, and the city went and bought these meters and put them in a warehouse because they then decided not to install them, if I remember right. And so now we've kind of horseshoed around and come back to that downtown meters. I'd be interested, well, I'll get into the details later, but, maybe the environment for that has changed too.
Absolutely.
I don't know.
Well, we have the value of having Dixon Resources and Julie Dixon on contract. We budget for her and her team on an annual basis, and the chief has her on speed dial, and she has the ability to pretty quickly give us some pretty strong estimates on what potentially we could be receiving for additional revenue.
Yeah. And unfortunately, you can't quantify what additional headache for the public and the council might occur in terms of trying to make that decision.
Well,
It's a less headache than it might be if we are in a situation years down the road where we're making significant cuts because we don't have the revenue to support operations.
Well, I don't want to wait that long.
Yeah, we don't either.
Yeah. But Joe had his business down here, I bet.
And so I can speak to the issue of the meters. Back then, I was very much opposed to it. And the reasons back then is, number one, you would have a parking meter in front of every storefront. Every parking space would have a meter. And in those days, you were feeding quarters into the meter. And my concern, as other businesses on Main Street expressed, that you're doing business with somebody and someone's coming in, interrupting, saying you got change for the meter. And so, I was totally opposed to it for that reason. And again, I wasn't on the city council and I didn't care about revenues. But as we sit here today, I think that, number one, that you're not going to have a meter in front of every parking space. Secondly, I think the public is used to paying for parking by meter everywhere. And so for that reason alone, I have personally, in terms of representing this district, I think it's something that, is time that we do that. The case has been made for the revenue need. And, not that, and again, I just think people, are more accepting of the fact that the municipality needs revenue. I talked to somebody from Laguna Beach, and I think their parking revenue is about $6 million a year, most of which comes from July and August.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the potential revenue is here, but it's certainly going to be better than it is now. I mean, we already have meters on the side lots at Electric and, up in the front 100 block. I think, I don't think it would be a problem.
Mayor, if I could. So we've been having this discussion with Dixon Resources on a number of occasions, one most recently at an actual parking conference. And as you mentioned and are very well aware, parking meters are a thing of the past. As you guys actually approved the last council meeting, we're actually moving to parking stations. Excuse me. And so what that actually does is it removes that requirement for the coin processing. And additionally, it offers the online Park Mobile, you name it, apps so that you're able to use your phone to pay for your parking, refeed your meters, and it actually makes it a little bit more not just attainable, but actually desirable for people to use in the city. And a couple other just different topics since we're on it. There are ways to set up these parking stations so that, residents who want to go get their cup of coffee on Main Street at 7 in the morning don't have to pay the meters. You can fluctuate them from, let's say, 10 a.m. to 10 p.m. And then your target market isn't necessarily the residents in the city more so than it is the out-of-town visitors. Further, there are estimates right now that we just looked at, and these are pie-in-the-sky figures, but they're anywhere from $300,000 to $1.3 million a year just on Main Street. So this isn't including some of your off-street parking. So let's say you went, 100 yards on Central Avenue either way, or 100 yards on Ocean Avenue, or 100 yards on PCH. So just Main Street alone, those are just some rough figures for you all to think about before you today.
So, from my perspective, for my district, I think that's something that we should look at sooner than later.
Yeah, a lot sooner.
I would ask for comments from the rest of the council, because you come down to eat and shop, and, how would you feel about that in terms of your view as a non-Old Town resident? What do you feel about having the meters?
Well, I'd like to save that discussion for another time personally. If we want to get on parking meters, we could talk for the next 2 hours on that stuff, I think. But if they want to comment, they're more than welcome to. I'd rather save my thoughts for later.
Yeah, well, just briefly, I'm kind of against it because that's one of the things I think Seal Beach is kind of known for, where you could come and park and go to a restaurant and not have to worry about parking if you're able to get a spot on the Main Street. Lived here 20 years, and before that I was in college coming down the Main Street, never worried about parking. So it's kind of one of the nice attractions to the city, in my opinion.
Yeah, I personally wouldn't mind paying to park. I just worry that it might push people into the neighborhoods who don't want to pay to park. I don't know how to guess what that would happen, but that's the only kind of the downside I would see.
That's, from my observation, it's probably inevitable anyway, since parking on Main Street, other than, quite early in the morning or the midweek at 4 o'clock, where it's not a problem. There may be, there's vacant spaces, but I think that I don't see that there will be lots of people that will, in order to avoid a parking fee, that will, impact significantly the streets adjacent to Main Street.
Mayor, if I could, one more item on the topic that Councilman Moore brought up. There's also another idea in the same parking project or scheme or management plan, however you want to look at it, is that residents also would have the option to, depending on what app we use for the actual metered stations, and like Councilman Verapapa said, we could go on probably a couple hours on this, but just so you all know, that residents in the city, you could make it so that they're able to obtain 2 hours of free parking or 3 hours of free parking, depending on how then they register their license plate, and as long as it comes back to their actual resident in the city of Seal Beach, you would provide them with free parking for however many hours you wanted to provide them each day. They would just have to log into the apps, and like I said, we could go on into a bunch of different ideas and other different avenues, but it's not, the systems are so profound, and they're not archaic anymore, and they have the options of manipulating it so that it's a little bit more palatable for the community, rather than being a stain on it. Just some ideas.
One thing related to parking is I don't know if the staff has looked at the parklets and possibly charging the restaurants, for the spaces that they.
Most definitely.
That might be something that we consider also.
That is definitely being considered. I mean, for the whole idea of if we're going to have permanent parklets, that's part and parcel of the program. Well, then I would simply say, let's get our ducks lined up and see what we can do. The chief is giving us some ideas as far as options for residents and ways to manipulate the system so it has minimal impact on our residents, but be ready to implement it. And I imagine it probably, unless all of the pay stations are on a ship somewhere, that it wouldn't take that long even to implement it, since we're not installing meters and we're installing a pay station. I don't know how many you would need per block, but it's just one of those things that I've come 180 degrees with regard to my objection to having pay on Main Street. Oh, it's still my turn. A question, I didn't look at specific numbers. Have we calculated into our costs, the increased costs in organic waste handling? I know we're negotiating currently as far as fees are concerned.
Mayor, thank you for that question. We are currently just had a kickoff meeting with HF&H, who's the consultant to help.
I can't hear you.
Sorry.
I'm sorry.
Got to add this thing on. I'm so used to it.
I can hear. That's
so we just kickstarted negotiations. We have a contractor, HF&H, who is an organic professional in the state, who helps a number of cities with regards to negotiating 1383 rates. Since we were just starting, we'll bring back to council the proposed rates once we come to some terms with Republic Services. You guys will consider and possibly approve those rates. Those will be pass-through rates to the customers.
Okay.
So there'll be no increase related to that. In addition to that, we just applied for a 1383 grant. It's non-competitive, so it's estimated the city will receive about $33,000 for that, and we can use it for edible food recovery, outreach. There's a number of different items we can utilize those funds for.
Good, thank you. The back-in parking issue, I was very quite adamant about the fact that we were writing, in my opinion, an inordinate amount of tickets for people that were backing into a space using the logic that I didn't believe there were over 4,000 scofflaws, and that it had to be, something that maybe we weren't doing lots. And I think that we've issued a lot of warnings. And so, I would be more amenable to, saying that we've given everybody a chance and read the signs and don't back in or you'll be cited. So, my objection to going back to citations is hereby lifted. Trying to help here.
Should that come as a separate item, the future agenda?
Yeah, I think we can, again, I'll lean into my staff team to talk about adequate timing to make sure that we have the information that we need and feel confident in making a recommendation and bring it back before you. I think both of these items, though, we've been monitoring, and especially because we have, Julie Dixon on contract on an annual basis, and we've already started these outreach efforts in terms of trying to get the guidance that we need and already have some preliminary estimated revenue numbers as a result. So we could bring it back to you pretty quickly.
Does that sound okay?
I apologize, just to echo on City Manager Ingram's statements there, the head-in parking, we could bring back probably within the next, I'd say easily 4 to 6 weeks. We don't need Dixon Resources to utilize anything on there unless you had specific questions for her, and I'm sure she wouldn't mind coming to the next meeting to discuss it. The parking meters, just so everybody's aware, since we're talking about that, there is another element to the metered stations, is that one of the requirements for Coastal Commission, as we all know, in raising the fees for the beach lots was a parking management plan needs to be implemented as well, and that's going to be some time. And so, although I don't mind coming back to you quickly with the headed parking staff report, but the metered parking lots is going to take at least a couple months for us to analyze what we need to do and then how to move it forward a little bit quickly. So maybe if you just give us a couple more months on that, we could get that to you before pretty quickly as well.
Another item that I think we have to have some conversation about, and that's the in lieu parking fee. It shows that I think we have a balance. It'll be $190-some thousand that's in that account, if that's correct. Let's see. Where did I lose that? Well, at any rate, I think it's projecting that we're going to be receiving about $7,200 this year in in-lieu parking fees. Do we anticipate that because of a business we expect a business to be going in that's going to require in-lieu parking fees? And then there's what is the money supposed to be used for, and what have we been using it for?
Thank you for the question. I can answer part of it. I believe the estimate was just based on historical. I don't think the number was placed in there with any specific thought in mind as to where that fee would be coming from. In terms of where the money has been spent before, I can certainly go back and research how that's been utilized. I don't know.
I mean, I guess I understand, unless, I never saw any legal analysis of it, but the money collected for in-lieu parking is supposed to go toward providing new parking opportunities, like a parking structure or something. And, I've been here almost 50 years and have yet to see a dollar spent on any new parking opportunities. And I don't imagine as we move forward it'll be as melodramatic as it's been in the past, where businesses, that were coming in that were being charged, $43,000 for in lieu parking. I wasn't very proud of that was a policy of our city, because it's basically, in my opinion, extortion. because there's no parking, and we weren't really building any parking. And I understand we did use some of that money for possibly streetlights at one point. That's what I was told, but that's before my time, when we put in new streetlights. And if we have these funds, so really my question is, we have the funds there now. Are we planning to just let that money sit? Or do we declare, like, let's forget about asking people to pay, in lieu fees, just because there's no place to put the parking, and there's no plan to build parking and use that money in that category? I know this is, a very unpleasant subject, but the money is sitting there.
In terms of the policy itself and the way it's written into our code, we can certainly bring that back to the council for consideration. So, and you're absolutely right, those funds are supposed to be used for a capital type of projects in order to create parking opportunities.
Good. Okay, thank you.
We can come back to you on Tuesday, because next Tuesday's budget study session, we'll kind of do a brief recap and see if there's, staff has any additional updates, council has any specific questions about operating before we move on to the CIP and the 5-year forecasting model. So that'll give us a couple of days to at least look at some history on it and give you an update.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I think that's all I have. Do we want to go back around? You got some more questions?
Yeah, sure. On the slide 4, number 4, you mentioned the vacant positions are budgeted at step 2.
Yes.
Is that going to be an issue if we fill those positions? Or are they going to be starting at step 2?
Well, that's what you're budgeted for, but typically with expenses, while you try and be somewhat conservative on the revenue side, the expenses are not typically as conservative, and as long as you have the revenue to support them. But it's been hard to hire people in any arena. And so will you be able to hire people at step 2? That's a good question. But if the department has savings in other areas of their budget, then possibly they could, hire at a different step than step 2. But I'm not sure exactly what vacant positions you have just off the top of my head right now, but I do know vacancies. And this was a way because we just didn't have the budget to support the revenue, or the revenues to support the budget. So this was one place we had to cut. And you'll see also with your unions that don't have contracts, those aren't budgeted either. So that 26,000 surplus is going to be gone in could be gone fairly quickly. So, which is why we're trying to kind of push some revenues on you.
Okay, and that was my second question, was the not including the estimated increase for the groups.
Mm-hmm.
I think we've done that in the past. Is this the first year we've?
I've looked at a couple of the old ones that looked like at one point you did 2%. I think and at one point I think your union contracts were based on inflation. So I think the 3% was kind of to stabilize that. And, like in this instance, the 8% would have just been astronomical to kind of put that number in this budget.
But 0 isn't really realistic.
It's not realistic, but we want to bring you a balanced budget so that you know what you're working with. So when you do approve these budgets, or when, the community sees that, hey, we're spending our last revenue for the year with this operating budget. So we wanted to give you a true picture of what's happening before, we don't want to inflate our revenues and then put all these costs in and then increase our revenues, too aggressively to cover these things. There's a chance that some of those revenues could come in and support some increases, and we're hoping that there will be some increases to those revenues. We're hoping they are conservative, but we don't want to base a budget on that hope. And that's why we're being conservative in this area as well, and being very, we don't want to spend where we don't have money to spend. And we've been doing that for the last several years because of the pandemic. And actually, your savings throughout the past couple of years haven't necessarily come from, they've come from, your staff not being filled, and they've come from just, you can't get certain constructions done because you don't have either the staff or the shortfall in supplies. There's just a lot of unknowns right now, so we tried to give you a really realistic budget, and so anything you add, you're going to know you're adding it. You're going to know exactly what's in there and what's not in there from the very beginning.
Okay. And what about we know inflation's going to be a problem for the next year. When you're doing I know you mentioned it a little bit, but is that going to affect the, certain categories quite a bit more than maybe we anticipate?
It could. When we went back and, like I said, we started with a 4.7 million deficit, and we went back to people and said, are there things you can wait until, the second half of the year, so we can actually have a revenue source to maybe support what expense this is? And I know there are a lot of expenses out there, obviously, even with, say, concrete. I mean, there's a shortage in concrete. So even if we wanted to go out and concrete the entire city, first of all, there's not enough money to do that, but there's also the fact that it's just a shortage. So, some of your savings for last year, you had a nice savings last year, but that was partly because you weren't able to do some of the things you would have liked to have done with that budget and those budget monies. So when we start over every year, you start over with a balanced, zero-based budget, and you start over and go, okay, now that year is gone, what are we going to do this year? And then you hope that your budget and your revenue support what you plan to do. But yes, we don't know. So it's our best guess right now, and we'll come back in 6 months with the mid-year, and hopefully it'll be better news.
Does HDL take that into account?
They do.
Projected
They're very good at their what they do. Yeah, they give good estimates, and they review them. We meet with them quarterly, so it's a constant look.
Okay. And my last item is, I know we have a lot of ideas on the last slide how to increase revenue, and I know that the city's done a lot already to reduce the expenses from what the initial budget was to what it is now. I guess my question is maybe we could have another slide called optimizations or something like that, where we could think of some ideas to help reduce some of the expenses.
Yeah, sure. I could share with you some of the things that we did to cut that budget. I mean, some of them were like consolidating some memberships. I mean, they seem minor, but they add up, and we literally went line by line and like I said, defer trainings. If there's training that's virtual and it's cheaper, we're going to go with those things. Where a couple people can sit in on a training as opposed to one person going, leaving town to go to a training. That's not always possible. But that's the detail we went through these budgets. And a lot of the contracts that we had out there that weren't being utilized, we'd had quite a few in finance, actually, that we just don't have the manpower to support the contracts. So although they're, nice things to have, when you can't afford them, you can't afford them at the end of the day. So, yes, so cost cutting is a way of life here.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we could easily come up with a slide. I think the point, though, is we can't continue, which is why we're talking about revenues now. We can't continue to cut and optimize and still be able to provide the same level of programs and services. So we can show you more at a high level how we were able to bridge that gap, but that, again, it's just not sustainable long-term for us to continue to make those levels of cuts, especially when a good majority of that is just deferring expenditures and projects and things, because we know, first of all, supply chain issues and the increased cost of providing those services, but again, I mean, we're at a place now where we can't sustain that long-term and continue to make those types of cuts.
That's, yeah, I guess that's why I called it optimizations, like maybe some ways, like with the IT, where we could, if the phone system's optimized a little more, maybe we don't need to hire an additional, or person, So basically, ideas to kind of optimize things, to maybe reduce some of the expenses. And I mean, where's the phone? I mean, we keep talking about the phone system the past 3-4 years. And that's, to me, that's the most important thing, is to have a good phone system where if a resident calls, they could go to, say, hit 1 for Public Works, and something gets logged as a ticket, and we can see how long it took the Public Works to respond, and then we have some visibility that things are getting done correctly. And I think I'd feel a lot better if something like that exists, instead of kind of having it in the ether that everyone's doing a great job. We see these data points that say, the Public Works responded in 2 days to this call, and then it's getting better, or there's a department that is understaffed or overstaffed, and we could kind of get a better feel for things. So.
Yeah, no, thank you for those comments, Councilmember. We are looking, and as you know, we just started with Client First, who's a project manager for the city, is going to assist us through the VoIP or cloud-based phone system. We had a meeting last week to kickstart, speaking of kickstarting meetings, and so we are looking at potentially the fall with the new phone system. Regarding your ticket service, we have looked at a number of vendors that provide that service, and it looks promising. It does look like something that could definitely help with the efficiency and make it more seamless for the customer to reach the folks that they need to inside City Hall, as well as for us to track the number of tickets that we receive, how quickly we respond to customer concerns. So I think it's something that it's really promising and we'll be utilizing.
All right, thank you. That's all I have.
I just had a question. Will we see at our CIP meeting, will we see the long-term projection updated? Will we get a chance to see that?
The long-term projection on the CIPs?
No, on the budget.
The 5-year forecast?
Oh, yeah.
Yes, that'll be part of that.
Okay. And do we know which meeting in June we're going to be looking at approving the budget?
The 27th, the
27th,
last
okay.
one.
Okay, that's all I have.
Cutting it tight.
Are you finished, Lloyd?
Mhm.
Okay. Sandra?
I don't have anything else. What happens if we don't make it by July 1st?
You can submit something to extend a budget, but I feel confident that we can get it done.
I'm not, it's not that I'm not confident.
Yes,
I
no,
just
you
wonder what the
can.
hammer
Yeah, no, you
is.
pass a loss for the actual term of what it is, but you do pass something that allows you an extended period of time. So, but we will be ready on the 27th.
And I've already gotten myself into enough trouble for the evening.
So Mayor, that concludes our portion of the study session tonight, unless the council has any other questions, suggestions, recommendations for us in terms of prep work that we need to be focused on, other than what we already are for the capital improvement program and the 5-year forecast for next Tuesday night's session. And again, we'll do a brief recap and do some follow-up on some of the things that we've already discussed, and do that at the beginning of next Tuesday's meeting.
Well, we have another hour and a half. We can talk sports or go home.
Or not.
Or not. Okay, well, then it says here, we will now adjourn the budget workshop until Tuesday, June the 7th at 5:30 PM for the continuation of the budget workshop capital improvement